Make sure you dust every day, and don't forget to polish the antiques. This house has been in our family for generations." My mother-in-law Margaret's voice dripped with condescension as she wheeled her designer luggage toward the door. Behind her, my father-in-law Thomas nodded along, barely looking up from his phone. "My name is Olivia, and at 8 months pregnant with twins, I stood in the mansion's grand foyer, trying to keep my composure as Margaret continued her endless list of demands. My husband James was loading their final bags into the car for their month-long Hawaiian vacation. "And remember, the gardener comes on Tuesdays. Make sure he trims the hedges exactly 3 feet high." No more, no less. Margaret paused, eyeing my swollen belly with barely concealed disapproval. "Try not to sit on any of the vintage furniture. In your condition, you might damage something irreplaceable." I bit my tongue, remembering the doctor's warnings about keeping my blood pressure down. James and I had been living with his parents for 6 months while our house underwent renovations. What started as a temporary arrangement had turned into a daily exercise in patience as Margaret micromanaged every aspect of my existence. "Of course, Margaret," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'll take good care of everything." She raised an eyebrow. "See that you do. And please call me Mrs. Anderson. Margaret sounds so informal." As they drove away, James squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sorry, honey. You know how Mom gets about the house. I have to fly out for that conference tomorrow, but I'll be back in 3 days." I watched him pack that evening, a plan already forming in my mind. What my husband and his parents didn't know was that I'd been doing more than just sitting around during my pregnancy. Those long hours alone in the mansion had given me plenty of time to explore, and I'd made some interesting discoveries. The next morning, after James left, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my best friend Emma, a real estate lawyer. The second was to a historian specializing in architectural heritage. Both conversations confirmed what I'd suspected for months. You see, Margaret's precious family mansion had a secret. While reorganizing the library, against her wishes of course, I found original documents from the 1920s. The house hadn't actually been in the Anderson family for generations as Margaret claimed. Her father had bought it in a questionable auction in the 1960s, and the paperwork showed some very interesting discrepancies. More importantly, I discovered that the house had been designated as a historical landmark in 1943, but someone had buried the paperwork. The Andersons had been making unauthorized modifications for years, violations that could result in significant penalties. As I waddled through the house that afternoon, I documented every improvement Margaret had made. The original hardwood floors she'd torn up for Italian marble. The period windows she'd replaced with modern ones. The authentic Victorian wallpaper she'd stripped away for her preferred cream paint. Each change was another nail in her coffin. Mrs. Harrison, the historian, Dr. Peters, arrived precisely on time. "These modifications are troubling. The original designation was never officially removed. This property should have been preserved according to very specific guidelines." I showed him the documents I'd found, watching as his frown deepened. "The current owners never filed for any permits for these changes. This is a serious violation of preservation laws." Emma arrived shortly after, her legal pad already filled with notes. The original auction sale was questionable at best. There were living heirs who were never properly notified. Add the unauthorized modifications to a historically protected property. "Olivia, this is a goldmine." I rubbed my belly, feeling the twins kick as if in agreement. "How long will it take?" "To file the paperwork? A couple of days. To process everything? Maybe a week or 2, given the historical significance." Emma's eyes sparkled. "Your in-laws picked a perfect time for a vacation." Over the next few days, I watched as my plan unfolded. The Historical Society was appalled by the violations. The City Preservation Board launched an immediate investigation. Emma filed all the necessary legal documents, and thanks to some expedited processing and a few well-placed phone calls, things moved quickly. James called every evening, and I assured him everything was fine. "Just taking care of the house, honey, like your mother asked." By the time he returned from his conference, the wheels were already in motion. I showed him the documents over dinner. "James," I said gently, "there's something you should know about your family home." His face paled as he read through the papers. "This can't be right. Mom always said." "Your mother says a lot of things," I replied, pushing another document toward him. "But the truth is, this house never legally belonged to your family. And all those renovations she's so proud of. They're illegal. James sat in stunned silence, the documents scattered across the antique dining table his mother had bragged about importing from France. Why did you tell me sooner? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Would you have believed me? I countered gently. Every time I've tried to talk about your mother's behavior, you've defended her. But this isn't about personal disagreements anymore, James. This is about legal responsibility. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. The Historical Society had scheduled an emergency hearing for next week, right before Margaret and Thomas were due to return. The fines alone could bankrupt them, James muttered, running his hands through his hair. And if they have to restore everything to its original condition. I reached across the table and took his hand. There might be a solution, one that could work out better for everyone. Over the next week, James and I worked with Emma and the Historical Society to draft a proposal. The house would be legally transferred to a historical trust, with a provision allowing the current residents to remain as caretakers, provided they follow preservation guidelines. But here's the clever part, Emma explained during our final meeting. As the person who brought these violations to light and initiated the preservation process, Olivia has the right to be named lead conservator. She has final say over all household decisions. James actually laughed at that. Mom's going to lose her mind. She's going to lose a lot more than that if we don't do this, I reminded him. The fines would be astronomical, and there could even be criminal charges for knowingly violating preservation laws. The day before Margaret and Thomas were due to return, we received the final paperwork. Everything was in order, legally binding, and absolutely irreversible. The Historical Society had already scheduled contractors to begin restoring the original features Margaret had destroyed. That evening, as James and I sat in the garden his mother had stripped of its heritage roses in favor of modern hybrids, he turned to me with a worried expression. Are you sure about this? He asked. Mom can make life very difficult when she's upset. I smiled, feeling the twins' kick. More difficult than being 8 months pregnant and having to polish her precious antiques every day. More difficult than being told I'm not allowed to sit on the furniture or use the main kitchen. He winced. I'm sorry. I should have stood up to her sooner. Yes, you should have. I agreed. But this isn't about revenge, James. This is about preserving something truly valuable, not just your mother's idea of status symbols. The next morning, right on schedule, we heard the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. Margaret's voice carried across the lawn as she directed the driver where to place her luggage. I hope that girl hasn't ruined anything, she was saying to Thomas. You know how careless young people can be, especially in her condition. James squeezed my hand as we stood in the foyer, waiting. The front door swung open, and Margaret swept in, already frowning. The hedges are uneven, she announced by way of greeting. Didn't I specifically say 3 feet? And why are there contractors' vehicles parked on the street? Mother. James started, but Margaret was on a roll. And what happened to my Italian marble? There are sample patches of wooden flooring in the corner. Who authorized that? The Historical Society did, Mrs. Anderson. I said calmly, emphasizing her preferred formal address. Or should I say, the people who actually own this house. Her face went white. What are you talking about? This house has been in our family for... No, it hasn't. James cut in, handing her the documentation. And we need to talk about the changes that are coming. Thomas peered over her shoulder as she read, her hands starting to shake. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly. We can, and we have, I said, rubbing my belly absently. But don't worry. You won't be evicted. You'll just need to follow the new guidelines. I'll be happy to review them with you. After all, as lead conservator, it's my responsibility to ensure everything is done properly. Margaret's knees gave out, and she sank onto the nearest chair, one of her precious antiques. You're in charge? Of my house? The Historical Society's house, I corrected gently, which will be restored to its original glory, as it should have been all along. Now, shall we discuss the new household rules? The transition wasn't smooth, but I hadn't expected it to be. Margaret spent the first week alternating between fits of rage and bouts of theatrical crying. She called every lawyer in town, only to be told the same thing. The Historical Society's claim was ironclad, and her years of unauthorized modifications had left her legally vulnerable. But where will I put my Italian furniture? She wailed one morning, watching as contractors carefully restored the original hardwood flooring. All my beautiful modern updates. The Historical Society has arranged storage for anything that's not period appropriate. I explained, comfortably settled in what used to be her off-limits sitting room. And they're quite interested in documenting the original pieces you removed. You did keep them, didn't you? Her silence was telling. We both knew she'd sold or discarded most of the original fixtures and furniture, another violation that had been added to the official record. The changes went beyond just the house's appearance. Gone were Margaret's strict rules about which rooms could be used and when. The Historical Society actually encouraged regular use of the spaces as long as proper preservation guidelines were followed. I turned the formal dining room, which had been reserved for Margaret's twice-yearly dinner parties, into a daily gathering space. The library, once kept under lock and key to protect the first editions, most of which turned out to be recent reproductions, became a cozy reading room. 2 weeks after the revelation, I went into labor. Unlike Margaret's prediction that I would probably ruin her imported carpets, I was actually in the garden when my water broke. James rushed me to the hospital, leaving his parents alone in the house they no longer controlled. Our twins, Charlotte and Henry, were born healthy and strong. When we returned home 5 days later, we found something unexpected. The house had been cleaned, but not in Margaret's usual obsessive way. Fresh flowers, local wildflowers rather than her preferred exotic arrangements, sat in simple vases. And in the newly restored nursery, 2 antique cribs had been carefully set up. "They were yours," Thomas said quietly, appearing in the doorway. "From when you were a baby, James. Margaret wanted to throw them out years ago, but I kept them in the attic." He paused, looking almost shy. I thought maybe, with the historical theme, it was the first genuine gesture either of them had made, and I felt a small spark of hope. Over the next few months, as I settled into motherhood and my role as lead conservator, I noticed subtle changes in my in-laws. Thomas spent more time in the garden, learning about the heritage plants we were reintroducing. He even started giving tours to Historical Society members, sharing stories about the house's past that Margaret had always dismissed. Margaret herself was slower to adjust, but adjust she did. It started small. She began asking rather than demanding, learning to knock before entering rooms, speaking to me by my actual name instead of "that girl." The turning point came during the twins' 3-month milestone. The Historical Society was hosting a small celebration, showcasing the progress of the house's restoration. Margaret had been quiet all day, watching from the corners as visitors admired the original features we'd uncovered. As I was putting the twins down for their nap, she appeared in the nursery doorway. "I never thought it could look like this," she said softly, running her hand along the restored wooden doorframe. "All these years, I was so focused on making everything new, perfect, impressive. I never saw the beauty that was already here." She turned to me, her eyes glistening. "I was wrong, Olivia. About the house, about you, about so many things. I was trying to create a legacy by erasing the past when I should have been preserving it." I adjusted Charlotte's blanket, considering her words. "It's not too late to create a different kind of legacy," I suggested. "The twins should know their grandmother, the real one, not just the perfect image." For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret smiled genuinely. "I'd like that." Today the house stands as a testament to both preservation and change. The Historical Society regularly hosts tours, with Thomas proudly showing off the restored features and Margaret, surprisingly, leading workshops on the importance of historical conservation. James and I are raising our twins in rooms filled with both history and love. The antique furniture is used and cherished, not just displayed. The gardens bloom with heritage plants, and the kitchen, once Margaret's exclusive domain, is filled with the smell of family meals and the sound of laughter. As for my mother-in-law, she still occasionally sighs over her lost marble floors, but more often he'll find her in the nursery, rocking her grandchildren in chairs that have held generations, finally understanding that some things become more precious with age and imperfection. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about winning or losing, but about restoring what was lost, not just in a house, but in a family.